Miami Dolphins football has arrived. And yes, it is only a preseason game, but we have waited way too long for this moment. So, no, we're likely not going to be seeing Tua, Tyreek, Waddle, those kind of guys in tonight's game. Definitely not a guy like Teron Armstead. It's football. And this gives us an opportunity because in preseason, you know it as well as I. We're not judging this team based on wins and losses. This is about player development and getting to see those non-solidified starters, roster bubble guys in those in-game situations. So rather than doing much of a real game preview, I want to talk about some of these individual players that you got to keep your eye on tonight as the Dolphins face the Falcons. I'm going to talk about 3 of these players, but man, there are plenty more. I was trying to come up with my list of the top 3. I had to do a lot of shaving of my list. So go ahead. The players I didn't talk about, drop those that you've got your eye on in the comments. Curious to see which players I left off mine that made your top 3. But let's jump right into it with an interior defensive lineman, undrafted free agent, Brandon Pili, who's been making a little bit of noise so far this offseason into training camp. But here's the thing. We are waiting for one of these interior defensive linemen to emerge kind of outside the big 3, I call them. It's Sealer, it's Wilkins, it's Raekwon Davis. Now, the Dolphins did bring in Deshaun Hand. So they've got a veteran that's kind of in that mix for what a lot of people really call kind of like the John Jenkins role from last year. But if the Dolphins want to invest in a young guy, in a guy that's flashing and showing some potential, this is Brandon Pili's opportunity. Opportunity number 1, anyways, for in-game action because the snaps are going to be there. We saw it in the joint practices. Christian Wilkins was basically given limited work in joint practice number 1. And then was told, you know what, why don't you just have the day off in day number 2? So they're looking to give these guys opportunities to flash and show that they stick. And like I said, he's been making some noise in training camp. He's one of those UDFAs. Aubrey Miller, another one that would make my list. And I kind of just cheated and snuck him onto my list here anyways. But these kind of UDFAs who are at positions sort of need yet, that we lack a little bit of depth at yet, that are going to get opportunities tonight. So Brandon Pili is guy number 1 for me. Second guy I've got on my list, a rookie from last year, basically active for what? 1 game last year for the Miami Dolphins, a 4th rounder from last year's draft. I got to do one thing real quick. All right, now I'm ready to go. But just like the defensive line, where we're waiting for someone to kind of emerge as like that next guy. Well, that wide receiver, we don't need necessarily someone to emerge for like a top spot, kind of like defensive line as well. We're waiting for someone to emerge as that wide receiver 3. And so far, it's been obviously Tyreek and Jaylen Waddle. You're not unseating those guys. But then it's been Braxton Berrios and Robbie Chosen. Those have been the guys that have really kind of emerged as that wide receiver 3. So I don't think Erik Ezukanma's roster spot is necessarily in danger here. But this is an opportunity for him to come out and maybe try to get his name into that mix for wide receiver 3, or at the very least, at least stick on this roster. Because what did he do last year? All offseason and a couple of preseason games. Man, the dude stood out. He looked like, you know what, man, we didn't need a wide receiver in the 4th round, but we took one, and this guy's getting it done. Well, then the regular season started and the team couldn't trust him because of the mental side of things. So we're not going to be able to tell really on the field tonight if he's overcome those mental hurdles. But what we're looking for is the repeat of the last year performance, going out there with Mike White, with Skylar Thompson, whoever it is, and just going out there and showing, you know what, hey, I belong in this league and I can carve out a role. Because if you look at Erik Ezukanma, when he came out of Texas Tech, he's a little bit of a unique receiver where he primarily plays in the slot, but he's a taller slot. So he can go up and he can get those contested catches. But at the same time, you can get him the ball and he can create in space. He's good at bubble screens. He's good at catching the ball and then creating afterwards. So the guy has a skill set that Mike McDaniel can use and likely would want to use. But right now, when we're looking for this 3rd pass catching option to emerge, it is Braxton Berrios. It is Robbie Chosen. And then it's probably a guy like Ezukanma after that. But this is his opportunity. And much like we said with the defensive line, we're not going to see Hill tonight. We're not going to see Waddle tonight. This is an opportunity for him to back up what he did in training camp and in preseason last year. All right, I said it was a hard list to come up with. I talked about Aubrey Miller. My next spot was really probably between Aubrey Miller and Channing Tindall. But I'm going to go with Channing Tindall in tonight's debate. Like I said, any person that I left off my list, go ahead and drop them in the comments as well. But what did we see from Channing Tindall last year? Special teams work, a little bit of work against the Bears in a spiral that lasted for like what, a possession or two, and then he was back out of the game. We didn't see much. And then you look at the preseason action, he got some run, and there were highs and there were lows. There were a couple of missed tackles. But what we need to see tonight is a little bit more of that consistency. We need to see more highs than the lows, because this offseason programming, whether it's been OTAs, minicamp, training camp, what I was told, what the reports have is like Channing Tindall is continuing to struggle. And with him, it is once again a lot of the mental stuff. He's just like Ezukanma in that way. But the nice thing about Tindall over the probably last 3-4 Miami Dolphins practices during training camp, he hasn't been getting called out as much for as many of the mistakes and the missed opportunities. He's actually getting his name called in setting up other people for making tackles or plugging up run blocks and limiting running backs after a minimal game. He was stuffing, I remember maybe it was Savon Ahmed, right at the goal line to prevent a touchdown. We're seeing a little bit more out of him recently. So this is another opportunity where maybe we don't need him to come in and be like an outright impact guy this year for the Dolphins. We went out and we got David Long. Jerome Baker is still going to be a big-time snap getter in this defense. We still got a guy like Duke Riley. We're experimenting with Andrew Van Ginkel. There are some options, but there's opportunity where if Tindall's name is called, whether it's in a specific spy role, a blitzing role, whatever his role would end up being, we need him to at least be competent when he's out there. He can't be seen as a weak link. You can't say, oh, Tindall's out there. Offensive coordinator sees that. We're drawing up a play where our running back's going to run a certain route because Tindall doesn't know how to handle that. We don't need him necessarily to be this outright stud, flash the goods that he had when he was at Georgia, because, man, the guy was making plays. Comes to the league and things have changed a little bit. He's with another defensive coordinator. And when you're talking about a guy where things really weren't clicking mentally, now you're going to change up defensive coordinators. Now you're potentially changing up your scheme and his role a little bit. That's a bit of an ask. And yes, he was struggling with it, but it's nights like tonight where you got that opportunity to really kind of put that behind you. But like I said, a lot of players to choose from. I cheated and kind of took 4, but I've got another 2 that are right on the top of my head that I'd like to talk more about, I should say. But I will let you guys take it from there. Drop your players in the comments. Curious to see who you'll have your eye on tonight. But that's what I have got. We'll be wrapping up the game. I will be back with a video at the conclusion of the Dolphins Falcons tonight. And until then, Dolphins fans, fins up.